Hello. If you enjoyed the story, leave your comment, give it a like and subscribe. Thank you very much. I never thought coming home early from my business trip would change everything I believed about my life. The flight from Chicago landed 3 hours ahead of schedule, and instead of calling ahead, I decided to surprise my husband Mark and my mother, who'd been staying with us while recovering from her recent surgery. The house felt unusually quiet as I turned my key in the front door, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Setting my luggage down, I noticed Mark's jacket draped over the living room chair and my mother's reading glasses on the coffee table. They must be upstairs, I thought, probably watching one of those afternoon talk shows my mother loved so much. I climbed the stairs slowly, planning my surprise entrance, maybe even bringing them some of the chocolates I'd picked up at the airport. But as I approached our bedroom door, I heard something that made me freeze. Low voices, almost whispered, coming from behind the partially closed door. My heart began racing, not from excitement anymore but from a growing sense of dread. The voices were definitely Mark's and my mother's, but there was something intimate about their tone that sent chills down my spine. I pressed myself against the wall, my hand trembling as I reached for the door handle. Part of me wanted to turn around, to pretend I'd never come home early, to preserve whatever illusion of happiness I'd been living in. But I couldn't. I had to know. With one swift motion I pushed the door open and what I saw would haunt me forever. There they were, my husband of 8 years and my 62-year-old mother, in our bed, in a compromising position that shattered every assumption I'd ever made about the people I loved most. But their reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of panic, shame, or even surprise, they both looked at me with what I can only describe as relief. The silence that followed my discovery stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, waiting for the screaming to begin, for the tears, for the desperate explanations. Instead, my mother sat up calmly, pulling the sheet around herself with the same dignity she'd always carried, while Mark simply looked at me with eyes that seemed almost grateful. "Sarah," my mother said, her voice steady and clear, "we need to talk." There was no shame in her tone, no embarrassment, just a matter-of-fact certainty that made my head spin. Mark nodded silently, reaching for his clothes with movements that seemed rehearsed, as if this moment had been anticipated, even planned for. I found myself backing away from the door, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing and hearing. This wasn't how betrayal was supposed to look. Where was the guilt? Where were the stammered apologies and frantic cover-ups? Instead, I was witnessing something that felt almost ceremonial in its calmness. "I know this looks terrible," Mark said, finally speaking as he pulled on his shirt. "But Sarah, there are things you don't understand about your mother, about me, about all of us." His words sent a new wave of confusion through me. All of us? What did that mean? I felt like I was watching a play where everyone knew their lines except me. My mother stood up, now fully dressed, and walked toward me with the same confident stride she'd had my entire life. "Sweetheart, I know you're shocked, but this isn't what you think it is." "Well, it is, but it's also so much more complicated than that." She reached out to touch my arm and I was surprised to find that I didn't pull away. There was something in her eyes, something that looked almost like pride. "Sit down," she said, guiding me to the chair by our bedroom window. "It's time you learned the truth about our family, about why your father really left, and about the gift that runs in our bloodline." "Gift?" I stared at her, wondering if the shock had somehow affected my hearing. What possible gift could justify what I'd just witnessed? As I sat in that chair, my world tilting on its axis, my mother began to speak in a voice I'd never heard before, ancient, knowing, almost mystical. "Sarah, our family isn't like other families. We never have been. What you witnessed today wasn't betrayal. It was necessity, survival, and the continuation of something that's been passed down through generations of women in our lineage." Mark moved to stand beside my mother, and for the first time, I noticed something different about him. His eyes seemed brighter, his skin had a glow I'd never seen before, and he looked younger somehow. "Your mother has been teaching me," he said, his voice carrying a reverence that made me shiver. "Teaching me about the gift, about what it means to be chosen by someone from your bloodline." I wanted to laugh, to scream, to run from the room, but something kept me frozen in place. Maybe it was the absolute certainty in their voices, or maybe it was the way the afternoon light seemed to dance differently around them, but I found myself listening instead of fleeing. "The women in our family," my mother continued, "were what some might call energy vampires, but that's such a crude term for something so beautiful. We don't take life, we enhance it, we purify it, we transform it. But we need willing partners, people who understand the exchange, who benefit from our touch as much as we do. She gestured to Mark, who nodded eagerly. I've been sick, Sarah. Really sick. That business trip you just returned from? I spent most of it in the hospital, getting test results that terrified me. The doctors found something in my blood, something they couldn't explain or treat. But your mother, she could. My mind reeled. Mark had been sick. How had I not known? How had I missed the signs? But even as I asked myself these questions, I began to remember small things. His increased fatigue, the way he'd been eating less, the mysterious phone calls he'd been taking in private. The gift skips generations sometimes, my mother explained, her eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. It skipped you, Sarah, but it's strong in me, and it will be strong in any daughters you might have. The men in our lives, they're not just husbands or lovers, they're partners in something much more profound. The room seemed to pulse with energy as my mother's words sank in. I looked at Mark, really looked at him, and realized she was right. He did look different, healthier, more vibrant than he had in months. But the implications of what she was telling me were staggering. So you're saying, I began slowly, my voice barely above a whisper, that you've been feeding off Mark? And that this is somehow normal for our family? The words felt foreign in my mouth, like I was speaking a language I'd never learned. Not feeding off, my mother corrected gently. Exchanging with. It's symbiotic, Sarah. I take what's toxic, what's diseased, what's dying in him, and I transform it. In return, he receives vitality, longevity, and a deeper understanding of life than most people ever achieve. Your father couldn't handle it when he learned the truth. He was too frightened, too conventional. Mark stepped forward, his hand reaching for mine. Sarah, I was dying. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe less. But your mother, she saw something in my blood work that they missed. She recognized the signs of someone who could benefit from the exchange. I've never felt more alive, more connected to the world around me. I pulled my hand away, my mind racing. But why didn't you tell me? Why the secrecy? Why did I have to find out like this? The hurt in my voice surprised even me. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about being excluded from something that apparently defined my entire family history. Because, my mother said, settling into the chair across from me, we weren't sure if you could handle the truth. And because we needed to be certain that Mark was truly compatible before we involved you in the process. Not everyone can survive the exchange, Sarah. It requires a specific type of person, someone with the right spiritual and physical constitution. She paused, studying my face with those penetrating eyes. But now that you know, now that you've seen the results, you have a choice to make. You can reject this knowledge, walk away from both of us, and live a normal life. Or, she smiled, and for the first time since I'd walked through that door, I saw something that looked like genuine maternal love. Or you can embrace your heritage and help us build something extraordinary. As the weight of my mother's words settled over me, I felt something shifting inside my chest. Not fear or disgust, but recognition. Suddenly, memories began flooding back. The way plants seemed to wither around me during times of stress, how people often felt drained after spending time with me, the strange dreams I'd been having lately about drawing energy from the world around me. The gift didn't skip me, did it? I asked, my voice barely audible. My mother's smile widened, and Mark's eyes lit up with understanding. No, sweetheart, she said softly. It just manifested differently. You've been unconsciously drawing energy your entire life, but without training, without understanding, it's been chaotic and unfocused. That's why your relationships never lasted before Mark. That's why you've always felt like something was missing. I stood up suddenly, pacing to the window. Everything was beginning to make sense. My inexplicable attraction to Mark from the moment we met. The way he seemed to understand me in ways no one else ever had. Even the reason I'd felt compelled to come home early today. You planned this, I said, turning to face them both. You wanted me to find you. This whole thing was orchestrated so I'd discover the truth. Mark nodded, his expression serious. We've been waiting for the right moment, Sarah. Your mother needed to assess my compatibility, and we both needed to be sure you were ready to accept your inheritance. The timing had to be perfect. But here's the thing you don't understand yet, my mother said, rising from her chair with fluid grace. This isn't just about our family's gift. Mark isn't just any man who happened to be compatible with our abilities. He's something much rarer. He's what we call a conduit. She moved to stand beside him, and I watched in amazement as the air around them seemed to shimmer. A conduit can channel and amplify our abilities, but more importantly, he can help us pass the gift to the next generation in ways that have never been possible before. With Mark's help, any children you have won't just inherit the gift, they'll be born with full control over it. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and I gasped as I realized the true magnitude of what I was being offered. This wasn't just about healing or energy exchange. This was about evolution, about creating something entirely new. So what happens now? I asked, my voice steady for the first time since I'd walked through that door. My mother and Mark exchanged a look that was filled with anticipation and something that looked remarkably like love. Not romantic love, but the deep affection of partners in an extraordinary mission. Now, my mother said, extending her hand to me, we teach you everything.